fight for our county in a way that no one else will. And I'm going to do that based on conservative values and competency, because what we've just seen in the news the last few weeks has been what happens when you continually focus government around political patronage and corruption. And political patronage is a form of corruption. It's not Rodney Ellis's African art deal, but putting people in jobs that they never should have had because of your relationship is not anything less corrosive and dangerous. And that's what I'm fired up to do, is start getting governments back to who has the meritocracy, who's the most competent to do the job, and start governing for we the people instead of we the established elite that have chosen who should run our county. Before I get into all of my plans on how I want to restore the county, I want to just introduce myself, let you know a little bit why I think I am so uniquely qualified for this job, and then hopefully just let you all take the conversation where you want. Happy to talk about any policy issues. So for a little bit about my background, I started my career in the military. I was a recruited athlete, hadn't thought about going to West Point, but 9/11 happened, and very clearly West Point was the place I needed to be. It wasn't something I could turn a blind eye to. It was the fight I wanted to get into. I thought I was going to go the legal route, but while I was in West Point, IEDs or roadside bombs were the big threat. To be blunt, that's what was killing my friends, and so decided to go through that path to join the Army Bomb Squad because it was the most impactful job that I could have. While I was in the Army, I was fortunate enough to deploy out of Fort Campbell as part of the bomb squad, and really in that job, you think about Lena Hidalgo's government, we've doubled government spending, so we've doubled the size of our county government, but EOD was a really interesting experience because we quadrupled in size. And it's a very relevant skill when you're in such a high growth organization, because you figure out who can play up and who can play down. So I spent almost all of my time actually as a company commander, which was far above where I should have been just because we grew so fast. And the really big skill that I learned is how do you figure out who are the technical experts? Who can run at this fast pace? Because I had to build a company from scratch, all the equipment, all of the people, even down to how many batteries we were going to take to Afghanistan. And I did that in a few months when the Army standard is a year. And that skill was so important because you figure out who are the doers. While I was deployed, my first few months, very traditional combat role, where I disarmed IEDs myself, but more importantly, I spent a lot of time in the operations center, figuring out how do I allocate this scarce resource, which were my EOD teams, to get them to the right place at the right time. A few months into my deployment, due to a combat death, received another early promotion, and I took over our headquarters unit. This was a very administrative role, not kind of what you think of as typical deployment as much. But all of a sudden in my 20s, I had 600 to 800 people reporting to me across 40 locations. And I got put in that role because it was a broken unit. We were losing rifles. That typically raises a few eyebrows once you have rifles going missing. What I unfortunately realized very quickly was my counterpart was a big part of the problem. But because it's such a high visibility role, no one wanted to raise the issue. The mentality was, hey, just turn a blind eye, try to mitigate the damage, but we don't want to rock the boat. So it ultimately came down to me signing my own counseling statement saying, I'm willing to be sent home, be relieved, because if you keep these kind of key personnel decisions the way they are, the unit's going to fail, I can't do my job. And so thankfully they decided to investigate the individual. I was not fired, and they did fire my counterpart, and it took a 3-star general to sign off on it. So it was an incredibly tense period for those few weeks, figuring out whether I was going to get sent home in disgrace or they were going to do the right thing and get rid of this person that really was a leech on the system. That was a very important lesson for me because what I learned about was obviously how important it is to make those difficult decisions. The impact of moving that one corrupt individual was night and day. The unit turned around in even a bigger way than I had imagined. So it was a true addition by subtraction. And relevant to county government, sometimes you realize you only have one silver bullet, so use it wisely. That's why I'm running against Lena Hidalgo. That's a joke. But very relevant. So after I finished up my deployment though, got out of the Army. In the background, my husband's a combat veteran as well. We met at West Point. Spent 6 years long distance, and so both decided to go to grad school, very fortunate. He got into MIT. I went to Harvard, got my law and business degree. And that's where we looked at the map and said, all right, I've just spent the last 6 years living in 8 states, living in countries I didn't want to live in. Where do I want to start a family, start my life? And Houston jumped off the page. If you think about Houston at that time, 2012, we were part of the Shell Revolution. It was a chance to be a part of energy independence. It was something where there really wasn't any competition. And so my husband and I started coming down to Houston then. I was very fortunate to have a successful career in oil and gas. The thing that makes Houston, I think, so unique compared to any other cities is the idea that it's a meritocracy. This is a place, and Harris County certainly reflects that people don't value you based on who you know, it's what you can do for them. And I think that's something so special and worth protecting, because that's not something you can say across the country. And I've lived in most of the country, and something where it is worth fighting for. So after spending a few years building my career in the oil and gas industry, I've left as a vice president working in finance. We started our family. I have 2 young toddlers, and we moved my family down. So my mom and brother live down the street. My in-laws live down the street as well. And for the first few years, felt like that was the best decision I ever made in my life. Right up there with who I chose to marry. But when Lena took office, that's where things started to change for my daily life. Where all of a sudden petty crime went to violent crime. My toddler was being forced to go to mass. It wasn't my decision. A lot of the businesses that I like to go went out of business. They were shut down. And so when I started digging into things, at first I thought, was this the city? I saw that no, city's kind of the same corrupt government it's always been. It was our county government that changed, where for 30 years we had good conservative governance, and I define that as being able to have a budget constrained by inflation and population growth. We even ran surpluses. And when I started digging into our county government, just saw the dramatic shift in priorities, where despite doubling the size of government, all the things that I care about supporting, law enforcement, infrastructure, roads, bridges, flood control, that's where money wasn't going. Instead, we've added a host of new social equity programs. So once I saw how much spending was being misallocated is really where I couldn't turn away, because we're very far from cutting the fat on the bone. I mean, appraisals have been going 10% a year. They just now announced over 20. I mean, that's an egregious backdoor tax increase. And even with that, we're still deficit spending. And what they're using that spending on is more decisions that should be your decisions, because we've seen in this administration the greatest personal liberties violation, at least in my lifetime. And that's what I'm fired up to fix, and hopefully with your support, I can get this across the finish line. I'm very proud to have the endorsements of overwhelming law enforcement organizations. There's over 10 now that have gotten behind me, including sheriff deputies, very proud Constable Ted Heap, Chad Norvell, as well as most of the police unions in the area. And I'm also the only candidate with county officials who have endorsed me, to include former Judge John Lindsay and Commissioner Raddick, as well as several members on City Council. And they've all done that not because of being friends with me, it's being confident that I'll execute a plan that's going to put good governance first, where I'm motivating and how do we efficiently and effectively run this, not who do I owe a favor to. So thank you very much. Would like to just kick it off for questions.
Just real quick, do you think that Trump won the election with it stolen? I asked that every...
No, it's fine. So I don't know how much things were off, to be frank, but I do not think that we had a efficient, we looked at the voter rolls where I think Senator Betancourt's one of the big ones who's been raising that, where more votes were cast than registered. And ballot by mail is my biggest concern. I think as county judge, that big area that I want to get active on is really cleaning those voter rolls. That's what's very hard for anyone to do outside of the county, aside from, which I think is unified across the board on the conservative power, returning the elections back to our county officials.
And also this investigation going on in her office now,
Yes.
where they did the search warrant. I read that it was initiated by the district attorney. Do you know if
Correct.
it's the DA?
Yes, it was.
So
indeed.
it came from
Yes,
Kim Ogg?
It did come from Kim Ogg, and what gives me confidence about it is they brought in state rangers. So again, with our county, anytime we can get state officials, the better. That's why I just related to your question. And this is one that I'm sure everyone on the conservative side is united, where we need a full audit of these last elections. I would say I'm very fortunate where I had enough of a belief, we got the most votes where it didn't impact my race, but there were people that, it's pretty detrimental to stop your campaign for a week because of someone else's incompetence. And so those are very serious things, and regardless of how much error there was, what is absolutely clear is we have no confidence in our system. And that is something you can't fix in 1 year. It's sort of like our foreign policy, if you were to go, where they're making errors that the next person can't quickly go in and fix. And it's gonna take a lot of time to earn that trust back. Sorry, yep.
So, congratulations on your war effort and your progress in the primary. So, let's say you get elected and it's 8 o'clock Monday morning and you take office. What are the first 3 to 5 things specifically are you going to
Yes.
do?
I would say to that, one thing that is different about me, I don't have to wait till Monday morning, right? You're gonna know you have the nomination in November, and you need to be working very fast. But those 3 priorities that I'll be working on and have already started is number 1 is crime. And specifically with crime, stop the revolving door. So as a candidate, I've already challenged the legal backdrop to that, so I didn't wait till I had the office. I wrote the amicus brief in support of Commissioner Cagle's agenda item that said essentially, federal government, get out of our state bail bond decisions. So that's number 1, and it's great because it doesn't even cost money. Unfortunately, because we don't have the majority on Commissioner's Court, that hasn't been done. But that's something that can be actually filed that first thing Monday morning. So it's all prepped, ready to go, you just change the title. The second piece is the funding decisions. So we saw they denied over 80% of law enforcement's budget requests. So what we'll be started working on with our other county commissioners, including and all of our law enforcement organizations, is what does healthy look like to you? How do we get there? So having that budget that puts public safety at the forefront will be on the next issue. What I hinted about in my opening speech, so crime's number 1, 2 is the budget, and we'll be working with our partners, but 3 is personnel. So one thing that doesn't get a lot of talk about is every county expert you can think about has been fired or pushed out. So we've actually lost almost 20 department heads. So if you think about these positions that used to not be political, I don't think a county engineer is particularly partisan. I didn't think Russ Poppy was particularly partisan running flood control. They've all been replaced. So fixing and finding the right people that puts competence first, and I will do that with the committee and key stakeholders of our county government to actually find the right people, because that is the biggest shift in corrosive change, and it's driving so many of these symptoms that we're seeing. That's the symptom of an election administrator. I have a lot of feelings about why I don't like the structure of it, but even as bad as the structure is, taking something from duly elected officials, it was the choice. There was actually a lot of people that had at least previous election administration experience that they didn't pick. They picked someone that they just saw as a political threat, wanted to tie her up so she didn't run against other Democrats, and the rest of our county paid for it. And if you start digging into this COVID contract, that's what it came down to again, right? Somebody that worked for Adrian Garcia, someone that worked for Hillary Clinton, got the inside track. I mean, that's as clear as an example of bid rigging as you can see in those text messages. But that's, to me, what's more alarming is that these aren't just one-offs. It's a pretty systematic theme that we keep popping up every couple months. And it all stems from having these political insiders pick their friends and put them at the forefront instead of trying to focus on good governance. Sorry.
I've got one, Alex. First of all, I want to say, the work ethic behind your campaign, kudos. I mean, a lot of work, I see that. I'm going to ask maybe a little bit difficult question, because what I find is a lot of these candidates, they'll run, they'll lose, and you never hear from them again.
Yep.
My question to you is, March 25th, let's say you don't get the vote. What do you do to ensure that we don't get Lena in November?
No, I have a plan to still be active, and actually, I think one of the biggest things where everyone needs to get involved, because whoever is the Harris County Judge candidate will actually get a lot of support. We'll support them, but I think what my biggest project would be supporting all of our district court judges, particularly, because they don't have resources, they don't have funding. If I'm the candidate, I'm going to do something very different than I think anyone else has, and started bringing them to the forefront, because that is the biggest thing that is resulting in a body count, quite literally. That's what we're now known for. People don't think of us as Space City, oil and gas capital. They think of us as the murder capital. If you watch Tucker Carlson Thursday, what was he talking about Houston for? He was talking about crime. He was actually talking about something I thought was interesting. he was walking through the outline of how people like myself and my husband came here to Houston. It's like, well, you're certainly not going to want to go to Baltimore. You know, you're not going to go to New York or LA. That this is one of the few great American cities left. And because of the open border, but the piece he's missing is because of the progressive policies at our county, it's destroying it. So we'll still be supportive, but like my passion, I guess, project, if you want to talk about it, is making sure these district court judges get elected. There's political pressure I can put in office. Part of it is getting rid of that O'Donnell consent decree. That was the legal settlement that Lena Hidalgo, Rodney, and Adrian have used to basically put pressure on judges to enforce this radical form of bail control. We actually spent $100 million of your taxpayers. And even in February, they released a report saying bail reform is working. So Kim Ogg has actually said that this is too progressive for me. So our George Soros funded DA says our form of criminal justice is a little off-putting. And so that's why it has to be the biggest focus, is figuring out, because you need the Harris County judge, but you really need those district court judges to right the ship.
I have a question. Going back to the budget.
Yes.
I'm concerned about the way redistricting has weakened our representation as conservatives on the Commissioner's Court. Kyle Scott has talked to us as treasurer. What can he do about that? But what can you do to make sure that you get the budget allotment to the things that are supposed to be happening and not where they've been?
Yes. And so with the budget, so as a county judge, I don't have any particular greater authority than a commissioner. So the budget gets passed by a 3-2 vote. What is very important, even if we're in the minority, and I'm elected, with Ramsey and I, we can stop taxes from being raised. That's why they redistrict. That was nothing more than a power grab, because Lena thought it was unfair, and she actually has quotes about it, that without 4-1, she's stuck basically only on growing revenue through either our appraisals or by putting debt on the county. And so just using that vote, but what I've started doing, which is different than others, back in January, I published an op-ed, it's on my website, where I went through in detail and talked about the shift in spending priorities, and we're actually benchmarked and said, you know, you look at Emmett's last year, law enforcement or criminal justice was 30% of the budget. You go to other years, it ticks up even higher. You know, the last full year Lena had was only 15%, right? And so what I do is, you know, my background, I was an investment banker. And so what our value is we go through and we take a company's forecast, right? And we say, do I think this is believable? Are you investing enough to achieve that sort of growth? And it was a similar skill set that I applied to our county. And I started looking at, well, what were the historical levels that we put into infrastructure, to law enforcement? Because what Lena likes to do is a little game, and she'll say, well, see, no, I increased the total money. So if you look at the new budget for justice and safety, which is a broad category, it's $1.3 billion. Then when you start digging into it, you see that it's an equal amount of funding for reducing violent crime, which I'm very excited to do, and that's a very simple thing, it's boots on the ground, so actual more law enforcement, not the trees and the social workers and everything else. But the other part that's equal spending is reducing unnecessary exposure to the criminal justice system. And that's when you say, well, what is that? Oh, that's our public defender's office that you doubled the budget. They didn't even ask for it last year, and it went from 40 to 80 million. Every criminal right now, defendant, not only gets a public defender, but they also have a caseworker assigned. So you've got that shift of resources. In the meanwhile, we have over 100,000 backlog of criminal cases. And the one thing that I do agree with them is, yes, justice delayed is justice denied. Why are you putting people's life on hold for 5 years because we haven't resourced the court system? You know, my plan will reflect overtime for our DAs, so they're working around the clock, and our court should be open around the clock. Just like if you're a factory, you know, I come from oilfield services, it's boom or bust. We don't wait till you build a new factory, you run multiple shifts. So that's the sort of private sector outside look at how do we become efficient, because it's inexcusable that we have that backlog, and where they are currently is just enough to maintain status quo. And why the Democrats aren't upset about the fact there's this huge backlog, and that is a denying of liberty, is because they know that puts pressure on these aggressive plea deals. So people they're just doing whatever they can right now to clear the backlog. So we just don't have a criminal justice system. But anyways, sorry to get off topic on there, but it's just when you really start diving in, you see the shifting of money. And for me, government should do a few things well. It's the things that require collective action. You can't make your neighborhood safe yourself. That's what the government's supposed to do. You're not supposed to have to fix the roads. People should be able to drive a sedan in Harris County. That's not really a reality because our toll road has been supplementing, that's the cash cow of the county. And it goes to everything else other than roads. And so it's really, when we say you're taking money from people's pockets, you have to actually put it to what you promised. And that's why like those flood control projects shouldn't change because that's what voters approved. Doesn't matter what my preference is. It's when you make a promise to voters, you have to fulfill it.
One of the problems we're having out here in our master plan communities and our HOAs is that they have gone to cancel culture. In essence, I cannot invite you to my HOA facility and to hear you speak, or any political candidate, any political officer, or anything to discuss a social divisive issue. I wondered how you felt about this and what the county could do about it. Thank you.
So this issue, I think ends up almost being more of a national, so a lot of your big corporations as well require approvals before you can donate. So to me, that is limiting a speech. So that's something where I came from a corporation that any political act, it's a pretty intense approval process, even for people to donate to campaigns. And so when you start seeing how that's been adopted more and more, I don't think that there's a specific role in the county other than, discussing that, unfortunately. As far as, I don't have legislative authority, I don't think you should. Lena's used emergency powers to have legislative authority. But it is a big issue, and just for me working for, my background of being in bigger corporations, how many friends are prohibited from being involved in a campaign it is something that is an ongoing thing. We saw it with the Georgia elections and Coca-Cola pulling out, that I think this is a federal issue. In how restrictive a lot of people have gotten where you are limiting speech.
But the answer to that is basically limit the funds, give the WCIDs and the MUDs the authority to not authorize payment to the HOAs because they've limited speech. So to me, you hit them with the pocketbook. It's the same thing in the county. You have tremendous discretion. And Howard Hughes, my developer, comes to you all the time, wants this reading, this reading, this reading. So to me, there's a lot of ways that you could basically nicely say, I really work hard for you guys all the time, but yet I can't come to your own county facility and speak, nor can anyone else. So to me, there's an out for you to use in a very nice way.
And I do think it should be, obviously, any party. It's just the idea of everyone limiting political speech.
It's social divisive speech, anything.
Okay, we've got time at the end. The format here for folks that don't know to do rants on any issue you want to talk about. Try to get some more questions to Alex. Anyone else? I've got another one. So Alex, you win the primary, right? Whoever wins the primary, you're gonna get the R vote, right? In November.
Absolutely.
So the question is how do you get enough votes, right, to win? Obviously you're gonna part of campaigns on the crime issue, but how many more votes do you need? Where are they in the county, and how are you gonna get them?
So on the broad demographics, everyone I think is fairly aware, right? We lost the suburban mom vote. If you were to talk, on the demographic, what really switched. Ed Emmett lost by under 20,000 votes, so very close. Trump was a much bigger spread, 10 points. If you look at it, that was a lot of areas that didn't come out and vote, kind of more of your Bush Republicans. So I don't think we're a 10-point county, it's just a high point to say. I think we're pretty close. And what it comes down to is really running a grassroots campaign. And if you look at just the efficiency of a campaign, so I got the most votes and was outspent 3-1, started the latest. And it's because I did the block walking, I went to the events. And if you look at my platform, I don't think these are partisan issues. They are very conservative stances, but on local government, I truly do believe the conservative majority is where people want to be. Most people don't like their property taxes this high, right? That we've seen an explosive growth of government intrusion with the mandates, which are now finally polling very unpopular. That I think what's unique is that I can actually still give a conservative message. I'm probably the only person where you can easily, there's no attack on me for being a political insider. So when you talk about really hitting Lena hard on what's happened these last few weeks, it's hard to say how I've ever profited off government. I just paid a lot, to be frank, and been pretty upset about that. But more I mean, what I don't like to do though is to talk and say, only this demographic because I look a certain way. I really do think it's about how do you effectively deliver a message and get out to the whole county. And what I'd only push back on is you saw the way I ran my primary, and it's just gonna be that, but being better resourced to do it more efficiently. I rely actually, there's a handful of SRCs that help, and we discussed things where I think it's unique to me that it's more of the grassroots organizations that I take input on. And it's keeping me at the forefront on issues. So, you know, when I launched my campaign, only candidate that had ending mandates on their website, and same thing on election integrity, if you look at it. You know, I don't have to be a weather vane and see what's polling well. And I think the idea that I'm speaking about issues because they're impacting me in my daily life is a lot better than trying to figure out a platform based on polling.
You might not want to answer this, and I understand if you don't, but how old is Commandante, and how old are you? Because you look awful young, but
I'm
you
37.
clearly have a
yeah.
lot of experience.
Yeah, I'm 37.
Oh, that's at least 10 years older
Yeah.
than you.
And
Okay,
she
all right.
came in office at 27. She's 30 now. But it's a difference. And I'd say the biggest thing that I think is great is that my experience has all been outside of government. So I've worked in large bureaucracies. If you've worked in the military, you understand what that's like. I actually worked on the Gitmo prosecutions. That was enough to tell me I didn't want to be in DC, as I watched the alphabet soup of organizations fight with each other more than figuring out how to get the right resources. But I've always had that experience of being in these large organizations and seeing what works well. And our county is a huge organization, right? Almost 30 different cities within it. You start doing school districts. You have to be able to navigate these, and it's very hard when you have conflicting interests. So I think the fact that I'm coming in without being kind of tied up actually gives me a great shot at really doing very meaningful change.
Well, you obviously got about 10 times the amount of experience that she does.
And the biggest thing, to be honest, that I'm excited about is just having private sector financial experience. That was one of the reasons that I ran. Even Vidal said the county is in great financial shape. That's why I wrote an op-ed saying we're in financial distress. Because revenue is not the same thing as financial health. It's very different, and you need to be forecasting and forward-looking. And that's where I sounded that alarm, and now you're hearing more people talk about it, and even Lena's been more defensive of we're trying to get away from deficit spending. That wasn't something they were ever even mentioning until I started throwing a big fit about it.
Can you try to look a little older, maybe?
I would, sorry.
Put some gray in there or
But
something.
you said for the general, though, I'm going to be honest. Like, obviously, my appearance is challenging for the primary. It's a huge advantage for the general. You wish everything was meritocracy, but the voters over 65 in the primary, and I still managed to get the most votes. When you get to the general, we're in their 30s. It's my peers.
Quick question on, you're talking about bringing a smaller government together. Of course, we all love smaller government. I grew up in Harris County. The Commissioner's Court is supposed to take care of potholes, parks, and police kind of thing. That's what Cagle is always talking about. We take care of a whole lot of other stuff. How do you just go about getting rid of after-school programs, all these nonsensical things that the county
And that's the
is
funding.
not involved?
Yep. No, I'm just saying, with ours, like I said, we have an Office of Sustainability. We created an Office of Economic Growth. It's like, well, if you probably didn't shut down all these businesses, you didn't have to create this new department. Because even if you look at our budget administrator, who happens to be really good friends with some of the key Lena staffers, that's why he's got his job. He's $400,000, and then they hired 5 deputies, and it's on the website. So we just hired a crime czar, right? Nothing against the individual, but when you start adding another $250,000 salary plus all of his staff, it's like, for me, it would have been actually funding some of those law enforcement requests. So they are always fighting every problem with another government solution, another bureaucrat, instead of the idea that maybe right now people are financially in a tough spot, you should give more money back in their pockets.
And then one follow-up, do you think we'll ever get back to the days that the only time we see you is right before a hurricane?
Yes, that's actually what I think. So that is actually what good governance is, if you don't have to see me all the time. The more that I could be actually doing the job, and if you said, like, what do I get excited about? It's the idea that instead of me staring at the budget and it says miscellaneous, being able in my office and actually having people that have to get me some of this data. Because I've been able to figure out a lot about the county, but it's very challenging. Even the op-ed I wrote, and Kyle had the same experience, there used to be a pivot table with great data, and that's how I was able to benchmark. It got taken down, right? Where, supposedly for transparency, there's a lot of roadblocks when you try to dig in and follow where this money's gone. And a lot's gone to consultants. I don't know the full dollar, but there's been a dramatic shift. And I've talked with former county judges Eccles and Evan about this. And the growth of consultant spending, which is just another way of saying, patronage to your friends is out of control.
Yeah, and it's worse than the charts. The line item budgets from each of the previous years have disappeared as well.
Yeah, no, I just meant so on certain
Yeah.
things, I can talk about what I studied myself. That was the 21 budget to Edmonds last few years. But right now, all that data's been pulled. And another point on this kind of aggressive non-transparency is my website's been pulled from all county Wi-Fi. We've, been coded as a video game. We've raised the issue, but I'm the only candidate that's had their website. Even Erica Davis, hers wasn't pulled. So they do monitor. They know I'm a threat, and I'm excited to take the fight to them.
Any other questions? Any other questions?
Does anyone have questions about what happened yesterday? Is everyone aware?
No.
Because this was a very big deal. So it was mentioned, so the search warrants that were executed against the county administrative offices were released. They're online. I had a public statement and have posted about it, but what it shows is there's a group text message between Lena Hidalgo, her chief of staff, and deputy chief of staff, and when they were writing or drafting the scope of work for the COVID-19 outreach contract, they were in constant contact with the person who won it, the Elevate Strategies that's partisan. So it shows them shaping the contract with a vendor. And Lena Hidalgo is drafting it. So on my social media post, you'll see we reference a Google Doc. But it's about 60 pages, these search warrants. Deputy Chief of Staff actually says slam the door on UT Health. Meaning, let's kick them out of this process. That is everything you're not supposed to do. They selected the vendor ahead of time, is what all these texts give the appearance of, and then crafted a bid to make sure that they would be selected. And
It's
so-
illegal, right?
No, that is definitely not legal.
Okay.
Like I said, you cannot work with a vendor in crafting a bid. And one of the few times, I wouldn't say it's often, but the Chronicle actually did a good article on this where they cited what the actual code that you're supposed to follow for crafting a bid. And it was actually a pretty thorough article. So I typically wouldn't recommend. This is one where this was bad enough that nobody's defending this action. There really isn't a defense. So that is a great sign for us. I don't understand, and obviously not the legal side, but this it gives the appearance of certainly enough stuff for an indictment to be coming. And the fact that we've Texas Rangers in gives me a lot of confidence. But that is where it is at the short. Was there's clearly Lena Hidalgo's staff and her awareness of crafting a bid. So all of this, I don't take money from county engineers. Ethical beyond reproach. It's like, see, there's a different type of corruption. There's the corruption of putting your friends above competency. And that's what has characterized her entire administration. It's not Rodney Ellis and his African art. Rodney Ellis is about money. Lena Hidalgo has made everything political, and that's what she skews the tables, is to make sure her friends are at the table at every decision.
If an indictment comes out, will that happen before the election?
And to the timing, those are just things I can't predict. I would hope so, but I don't have an inside track to know. What I can though is read those search warrants and see what is a very clear example of bid rigging. And it's what everyone knew 6 months ago. That's why that's her defense of it's my campaign video, because it smelled 6 months ago. And to be honest, the texts are more egregious than I would have thought.
It would probably take a while to go to the grand jury and all through the process. It would take a while. I don't think.
But they've already extended it, so it's moving.
I'm sorry?
The grand jury's already been extended, so it's in process. So that's what I just meant. But to the timing, I don't want to speak out over my skis, but what is clear is there's an abundance of evidence that looks like nothing short of bid rigging.
If Kim Ogg's involved, it must be pretty extraordinary. And she
Yeah,
would
no, it
actually
just meant,
pursue-
when you read all the text, it's key staffers and Lena herself having group discussions about shaping a proposal and back and forth with the person who ultimately won it. And the other piece that doesn't get hit on the news but is equally as damaging, the selection of this vendor was because of the utility to help her future campaign work. So they talk about this would be good for campaign work. That's also a violation. And gets back to this theme of people that are political insiders trying to shape the process. So there's a couple issues with it.
What's your biggest contrast with Vidal Martinez?
I think being unconnected with the government would be the biggest contrast. And above there, at this point on our issues, we sound pretty similar. I actually agree with him on most of the stances. The only difference is he would want to put increase the rate on the toll road for trucks. I disagree with raising the toll road authority rate. That's not going to help our competitiveness with the port. And I think if you actually put toll road dollars to roads, you could fund it, because like I said, that supplemented everything else. And then he would like to put the DA on a performance plan. Logistically, even the way we pass a budget, that it works, trying to implement that, we are so backlogged in the amount of time it takes to hire district attorneys that I do not want to put her on the budget plan. I want to address this right now, and I'll have 3 more cracks at the apple. And that's where I want to get from every department, is not only their budget request for that year, but what's your long-range plan? Because I have a 4-year term. I want to know, what do you think you need to get to healthy, and I'll be able to benchmark you along the way.
Del Moral, is that your married?
Yeah, that's my maiden name. So my family's from Spain. So I'm second generation. My grandfather actually got kicked out of the country, was put in a concentration camp. He led the opposition to Franco. So I grew up with those stories of what oppressive government looks like, and something deeply ingrained in me.
This is probably more a legal question than anything else. In my previous law enforcement experience, the district attorney was the sole prosecutor of criminal cases. In recent rulings by the state Supreme Court, they try to take that power away from the attorney general. Okay, so in the theme of you can indict a ham sandwich or not in a grand jury, I mean, we've seen some show pony cases go to grand juries, no true bill. I think the most recent one is probably the Watson issue. If Ogg goes along, plays along, whatever, takes it to grand jury, no true bill, what's the recourse for that? You can't go to the attorney general right now until that case law settles out. You see what I'm saying? You get this one dilemma. I mean, I'm from Louisiana. The sheriff and the district attorney used to be pretty much equal.
No, and like I said, in regards to the criminal charges, like me as the candidate, there's not what I can do. I mean, I'll keep running the hard campaign and hyping on corruption. I think the fact we've lost 20 department heads speaks a lot. But that's kind of the point, though. County judge should not be involved in everything. We'll keep raising that, but really what you want to know is there's a storm, that you have a competent person to lead this county in the crisis. I'm the only one with emergency management experience, right? And you want to know that our budget's reflecting your priorities. That one of the things that I don't want to do is try to take over every aspect. And unfortunately, there's things you cannot do. There's a lot of issues, but this is the most impactful position. If you were to equate it more with political authority, it looks a lot more like being governor of Oklahoma. And so I think when you're selecting somebody, it should be given that same care, because we spent more money than the state of Oklahoma and have more people.
Any others? I think we're good. Let's give Alex a welcome. And I think, God bless, we have at least one good candidate. So.